Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and joining me today is one of my very good friends, Davey. Hello, Davey.
Hi Sam, how
I
are
knew
you?
that. I'm well.
Why
We've
you?
just done
Oh,
all this preamble before I press record, so it's always that awkward thing of like going, "Oh, how's my guest doing?" Even though I've been talking to you for 10 minutes before we press record, but it's just for the audience's benefit, really. But you're doing all right.
I've never been awkward a day in my life. I won't start now. So how are you though? Are you good? Is
I
everything okay?
Everything is fine. Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm a bit
Yeah,
tired. I'm actually feeling a bit unwell, if I'm being honest. But I
yeah,
could not
yeah.
skip past the it's good.
It was an obligatory question, not really for
Yeah, so we'll move on. So viewers out there, Soft Focus, episode 3. Me and Davey going to talk about 2 Blu-rays that we've watched recently. Sort of
Mhm.
short form conversation based reviews, conversation about just a couple of things that we've been watching, maybe recommendation, maybe not a recommendation, just honest, conversation based discussion. So, guests first. What are you going to discuss with us today, Davey?
Martin Scorsese's After Hours. Um, I should really subscribe to your channel. um, no, I'm going to talk about the BFI's release, Scala! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. So if you are looking for it, please include the exclamation marks. Or to give it its full title, as it does have one in the spine, which is rather Scala, or the incredibly strange rise and fall of the world's wildest cinema and how it influenced a mixed up generation of weirdos and misfits.
That's a
Just
nice long title.
just put Scala and you'll find it.
People would talk more and more about the Scala. We should go to the Scala. It's really going on there.
This was released a few weeks ago by the British Film Institute themselves. Go bless you, King Charles. Um, I was interested straight away because I've got a real hard on for. I'll just leave that sentence there. Actually,
Right, I'm going to use that. I'm going to clip that
yeah,
and use it for some other purpose.
a real hard on, not one of those fake ones. Um, I've got a real hard on for films about media that we like. So I must have about 5 or 6 Blu-rays about the history of VHS and video stores, and then I've got about 10 about record stores and vinyl pressing plants and the history, blah 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 blah. So I just like that kind of thing. So I was intrigued by this anyway, and I knew what the Scala Cinema was. It's a King's Cross legendary cinema from 78 to the mid 90s, which ran what we'd call cult films, alternative films, but not particularly art house films. There was crossover, but there wasn't an emphasis on the art house. There was much more an emphasis on what our audience actually want to see. So this goes through it from essentially the early days where the same venue had a lot of punk gigs and a lot of starting to develop into new wave. And then there was a couple of venues. Won't go into the whole history of it because there's a movie to do that for it.
Yeah.
But there was a couple of venues. This most iconic one is where it mostly focuses on, the one that they had from about 1981 onwards. And it kind of takes the history of the Scala cinema and the films that were shown there and juxtaposes it with Thatcher's Britain when the films that it's most interesting, juxtaposes it with the kind of things you couldn't get away with in the mainstream cinema, and at other times just gives you fun anecdotes. So there's about 96 minutes of that, and it could easily lose 10, maybe 15 of those minutes, because there's a few times where you think, that fun anecdote you're really giving us because that's a personality on screen that you want to have in your film. It's full of people like Stuart Lee. It's full of John Waters is in it quite prominently. He's all over the desk. Paul Putner, a lot of alternative comedians, musicians. To say Stuart Lee, yeah. Adam Buxton's in there, so a lot of people who were influenced and went to the Scala growing up, and it was aimed rather wonderfully at almost underage audiences, so they weren't too bothered about who turned up as long as they paid. And that was the kind of audience that we're targeting. So unlike most art house cinemas, they would be just as likely to show Rambo as Tarkovsky. So it's not that kind of art house cinema. And they created a scene within a scene itself where people started just collecting, like Scala. They had the big programs for each month that would show you what was coming out each day, and people would collect them as almost memorabilia. The membership cards, people now collect those as memorabilia, which the membership cards kind of ties in. They don't really go into this in detail, but there's an idea that by having a membership card and making it a club more than just a walk-in cinema is how they kind of navigated showing a lot of the banned films that you wouldn't be allowed to otherwise show.
Yeah.
So technically it was a club, although you could just walk in for nothing after 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was one of those places that would pretty much feel like it was open 24/7. And no matter when you turned up, something interesting was on the screen. Be it Pink Flamingos, or be it an old Hammer film or a Universal film, whatever they could get 16mm or 35mm prints of that they thought were interesting and would hold an audience's attention and sometimes push an agenda, was something that they'd show. And the programmer, one of the ladies who directs it, it's directed by two women, was one of the programmers of the films. And she started doing that when she was 19. And she'd already been working there for a couple of years. So it really shows you it's not coming from a place of, you think these days about people that kind of control the establishment of, I don't know what you want to call it, film Twitter, and who controls the narrative of Criterion and all that kind of thing. Generally speaking, it's people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. 19 years old, and she's telling her audience what they're going to be watching. She's controlling that. 19 years old in the mid 80s. So the booklet itself is, as always with the BFI, pretty fantastic, and it goes into a lot of that kind of stuff. But rather wonderful, what it does here is it goes through a lot of the players of the Scala and related, and asks them, what kind of things do you think the Scala would have shown subsequently if it had lived? If it had kept going. Somebody suggesting Velvet Goldmine along with Ziggy Stardust. Somebody suggesting, there was a cracking one here, female horror debuts, The Babadook, Saint Maud and Raw. Demonic Dancing, Climax, Black Swan and Suspiria. So it goes through all sorts. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of examples of that. It goes through the cinema itself, the history, it goes through the culture, it goes through the outsider nature of it. It's got sporadic animations throughout it and a new score composed for the film itself, along with quite a lot of pop and punk music from the eras. And as with the BFI, as always, absolutely tons of extras, including a documentary about the Scala, which had been made in 1990 when the cinema was still going, which is about half an hour long. An extra hour of the interviews, which, again, the film runs a bit long, so I don't think you need an extra hour personally, but it's nice if you're enjoying it. A 4-minute student short that was done at the cinema, and then the BFI, one thing I love that they include on a lot of their releases are short films. And what they have here are 3 short films that were actually shown at the Scala. So that was the proviso for this. And one of them is a gay remake of, what do you call it? Oh, Trevor Howard and Celia Johnson, Brief Encounter.
Okay.
David Lean's film.
Nice.
So it's
nice.
a queer short film remaking that in the 80s. At the height of the AIDS epidemic. And that was something they focused on too, was Monday was a notoriously bad day for films in terms of takings at the box office and cinemas, still is. So what they decided to do was Blue Mondays, where they would show sexploitation films on Mondays and get the pervert audience.
Nice.
as they call it. They decided we'll take the hit on having sticky floors on a Tuesday morning as long as we can get the box office, and that was part of the ethos too. They didn't judge anybody, but they would call it the pervert audience, and we'll only see them on Mondays with their overcoats. They would have lesbian nights where they would give out rubber gloves at the screenings, and yeah, very
Nice.
ahead of the game. Very ahead of the
Yeah.
game. They would have. They wouldn't pat themselves on the back and call it a season or have big posters of this is what we're doing for the next month, but they would just show a bunch of queer films, or they would show a bunch of action films, or they would show a bunch of. And Walter Hill was a favorite, but then the next day you would get some strange underground French stuff, just because it was vaguely queer related, but not because they were coming at it from an auteur's point of view. Usually because they were coming at it from a, this is kind of raunchy, I like this. So it's never pretentious about it. Not that Just Like French films is pretension in and of itself, but it was coming at it from a teenage point of view, really, which is the great aesthetic of the Scala. Always coming at it from film fan point of view rather than someone looking to write the book later on, rather than an academic point of view. And then, just the notorious things about the Scala that everybody who's heard about it knows, that they had a house cat in the Scala and it would just wander through screenings. So whenever they showed The Evil Dead or something and the cat would just brush by people, would start panic and everybody would just be terrified. There was an old woman who's interviewed in this wonderfully called Mrs. Reeve. Even then, she was in her mid-70s. And picture the quintessential old woman that you can imagine going to church and bingo, and then give her a leather jacket and have her talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She's in here, Mrs. Reeve, and her quote is, I don't know why they give the kids hard times. And she says, we, the Scala audience. She goes, we love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you don't see me going out with a chainsaw and murdering people. She's great, Mrs. Reeve. What a character! And she only died 2 years ago at the age of 106. She's mentioned in the booklet. So bless her. Mrs. Reeve was there with the 17-year-olds and the ladies up the back enjoying Blue Mondays, and she just went to everything. So that's the kind of audience. It didn't matter who you were as long as you were something interesting. You weren't outside, or you weren't mainstream. You weren't looking for the biggest film of the week. You were looking for something interesting, odd, and outsidery. So yeah, Scala, just stunning documentary about a kind of lost culture, but in a strange way, the birth of a lot of what we have now in internet culture at the same time as well, subcultures that we now have when films are much more accessible. So it can go from Borovchik to King Kong, as the cover even has. It has a picture of the beast from Borovchik and it has King Kong. And that's the kind of films that they'd show on a double bill and just say, why not?
Sick. This is very much, I was going to be getting this at some point, but like your review and just explanation about exactly like what this documentary is and stuff is just whetted my appetite to pick it up so much sooner. I love things like this, like delving into culture, particularly things I'm really interested in, like even things I'm not interested in, like a well-made documentary, like makes you interested in a subject that you wouldn't normally be interested in, but like when you're already interested in it, and it, like from your description, it tells you so much about the people who are involved, and just especially when you mentioned like juxtaposing it with the political state of the country at the time and things like that. That I just eat that sort of stuff up. I'm always into like context and things like that, and it just sounds like a wonderful disc. And you did say to me personally in like a message that this is like, you think it's early days yet, we're in February, but it could be it's in contention for like end of year lists already. So it's
for my taste at least. But I mean, put it this way, the back of the box, given our tastes, the two pictures at the back of the box are Divine and Christopher Lee in The Wicker Man. I mean,
nice.
Come on. It's like it's made for us, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Awesome. Can't wait to pick that one up and watch it myself. Right. Let's talk about my pick.
What did you choose, Sam?
I chose a film. It's sort of related to the beanie that you're wearing. So it's a Severin release. What? No. Oh.
Captain Scarlet, is it, Sam?
No, I haven't watched
Captain.
I have not watched Captain Scarlet recently on Blu-ray. Sorry about that. Anyway, we're talking about Michele Soave's The Church. Have you seen this film, Davey?
Yes, I have, but not on the new edit. I've just got one of those old Blu-rays that the kids used to have.
You go old Blu-rays that kids used to have.
A Shameless one, I think it is.
Yeah. So I've only ever seen one other Michele Soave film, and that is Stage Fright. This is the Shameless one, and this looks pretty good. It's from a 4K restoration, and it's probably one of the better like Italian slasher giallo-y films. Not like straight up giallo, but it's more of a slasher mystery, which is sort of giallo-y, but it's more leans into the slasher side of things. And I was very impressed with that film. And then Severin announced that they were going to be putting a bunch of his films out on 4K. Last year they turned up this year. But it's to be expected. The quality of the product usually is worth the wait. But anyway, yeah, the Church looks absolutely stunning on this 4K, and it's a pretty comprehensive and definitive release, I'll probably say. So the Church sort of is a gothic supernatural Italian horror film. The sort of the beginning of the story, it's set in medieval times, and what are they called? They're these knights. I can't remember what these knights are called. You have to forgive me.
When knights around table.
Yeah, you sing while I look it up.
Able.
I can't remember, but they're basically enforcers, like military type enforcers for the Catholic Church, that basically assume that this village that they're trying to convert are basically devil worshippers, and then they proceed to massacre them all, and they bury them all like in a mass grave, and then build a Gothic church on the site, and it sort of like contains the evil spirits and things like that. And then we transport to modern day, and like a librarian played by Thomas Arana comes, and then he starts a relationship with a woman who's working on some of the paintings in the church, and one thing leads to another, and the evil spirits are disturbed. It's very Italian, obviously it has like ADR and things, so it's like all dubbed over the top, and it's just got so many awesome set pieces, and the score is one of my favorite things I've listened to in a while. So it's by Goblin and Emerson. What's his name?
Keith Emerson from
Keith
Emerson.
Family, yeah. Keith, that's right, yeah. And included in this, you get the CD soundtrack, because I was trying to find, it's not like on streaming services, this soundtrack, so it's really cool to have it on physical, so I can listen to it at my leisure. And it is one of those scores where you can listen to it without the image, because there are quite a lot of soundtracks where you watch it and you're like, oh, this is really good music, but then if you listen to it without the images that you're supposed to have it with, it doesn't have the same effect. But then other scores like just work perfectly without without the images, but then work really well with it. So it's one of those instances where Goblin music is generally pretty awesome. So yeah, when I say that this is like a definitive release, it's 3 discs, and it has basically an interview with almost every single person that was involved with the film. And it's just absolutely incredible. And some of the anecdotes, so Hugh Quarshie's in it, who recognizable on British television. He was in Holby City for like 20 years or something like that, and he was in Doctor Who,
Daleks in Manhattan.
Yeah, I was bringing it up. I hadn't forgotten. I was going to say, Davey. As a side note, Davey's put me on a bit of a journey with Doctor Who. Just finished the Matt Smith era, so I'm moving into Peter Capaldi's era. But anyway, back when Tennant was still in it, there's a double bill episode with the Daleks, and Hugh Quarshie's in that one, and
with Andrew Garfield
as well, and he's really good. And Hugh Quarshie, his performance in this is really, really good. I think he's the best. Like, everyone's pretty decent in it, and there's no bad performances or anything like that, but he's like really like above the rest of the cast, and it's really interesting to hear stories about, like, this was the first time he'd worked where the no sound was recorded on set, and the set was really loud and busy, and people just walking around and just like talking in the background while they were trying to film scenes. And it was like, I can't work like this. This is too distracting. And like Thomas Arana had to like sort of guide him into how to, because he'd worked on the Sect with Michele Soavi, which I have not watched yet, but I do have that 4K as well. But he worked with him, and it's like sort of guiding him through how the Italian, you know, production ways are so different to the rest of the world, really, or any sort of production team where they don't record sound on set. It's just sounds like chaos, but you know, they can just fine tune and do all the dialogue post production and stuff. And but he still gives a wonderful performance in it, and yeah, loads of great striking imagery, and I was just totally blown away by it. The music really does elevate the film for me. Like, it just captures this I don't know, proggy, synthy, just very 80s. Even though this came out in 89, it still has that like the heart of the 80s soundtrack going on for it, without being like harping on certain themes that a lot of 80s, maybe American 80s films would have in their soundtracks. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely its own distinct thing, and very European sensibility with it. And yeah, I was absolutely blown away. It's comes really the alternate artwork on the inside, and then it's really cool because Severin don't tend to do this unless it's one of their big like box set things, but it comes really like a pretty hefty book in there as well, which is really good. It's got loads of awesome writing on it, and oh yeah, I was thoroughly impressed. And dare I say that it came out last year technically, but I don't know how to. Not many people received it last year. Is the thing.
Yeah,
like even American customers were still like, were getting these delivered in January.
I think I got my Severin order. I think I did get my Severin order before New Year, didn't I? Because I had Spiral Labyrinth on my end of the year list. I recorded that last year. So.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's one of the best things I've watched this year in terms of like, I really enjoyed the film. It has quite a bit of humor. Actually comes towards later, like people get stuck in this church when things start to go haywire, and then some of the weird characters that are involved. There's a bit of humor, which in some Italian productions it doesn't quite land, but for me, I found it all quite charming, and just great. I love the presentation. These sort of discs really do fetch a premium, and a lot of people do have a lot of gripes with how much these cost, but some people don't realize how much it costs to restore these things, because a lot of these like the film negatives and stuff, they won't let out of Italy. Like they have to stay in like vaults in Rome and stuff. So if anyone outside of the country wants to come and scan it, they have to bring their own equipment and ship it into the country, and you know, do all that, which is a huge cost. And then, you know, then do the restoration once they've got like the digital files and things like that. And that's a huge undertaking. And I don't think a lot of people realize that that's baked into the cost of this sort of thing. Yes, it still is pricey, and I wouldn't necessarily, I'm a sucker for things like this in general. So I thought I was going to enjoy it, and I did. And I absolutely loved it. But if you're like on the fence about something like this, maybe wait for like a standard edition, rather than paying quite a bit of money on one of these releases, even though it is, I dare say, going to be a definitive release. I can't see what else is going to come out in the future that would top something like this, because it's just perfect visual, audio, presentation, interviews with everyone. It's like 3 hours worth of like stuff on here, and it's all quite interesting. None of the interviews feel overstay their welcome. You know, they're like just the right length, or the right, whoever edited these like interviews have like known what to cut, basically, because sometimes you can tell like, oh, this person was probably sat in a chair for 2 hours, and they've basically cut like the best 30 to 40 minutes of that conversation. And I'd much prefer that to get the meat of what they're actually trying to get across and stuff like that. And yeah, I love this. I can't wait to delve more into the other couple of things. I've got the Sex and the Cemetery Man 4Ks, so hopefully dig into those at some point. But yeah, I wanted to bring that up today to highlight it as something that I really enjoyed, and think is a great physical media release.
I love Cemetery Man. Della Morte della More, with Rupert Everett in a very un-Rupert Everett role.
I've heard that one's got. I haven't seen that. I probably should have done by now, but I'll correct that soon. But I've heard that one's got quite a lot of humor in it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite like dark humor in it, and I enjoyed the humor in this. Although I think the Cemetery Man leans more into the humor a little bit with its absurdity and things like that. But yeah, I'll check that out for myself at some point. Awesome. Do you have any closing remarks, Davey? Before we tie up this episode?
Not particularly.
Awesome.
I mean, come up with something if you want. No, thank you very much. This has been informative, interesting, and entertaining. I'd like everybody to click like, share, subscribe.
Is that it? Click like.
That seems
and
like
comment below. Let us know what you think of. Comment. You forgot.
Smash
comment.
that like button.
Yeah. Anyway,
ding that bell. Yeah.
Thanks, Davey. Thanks for the promo. Yeah, if you have any comments about any of the picks that we've talked about today, what you thought of them, please let us know in the comments below, and also let me know anything that you've been watching recently. I'm always intrigued to see what other people have been enjoying and recommendations and things like that. I'll leave links to Davey's channel in the description below. And until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye.
See you, Davey. I was like, have you frozen?
Is that the ending? I was like, is it?
It is now.
Oh wow.